And welcome back to Deck Building. I'm your host, Demo, and it's time for another deck tech. This will be my last deck tech for Commander Legends. At least, for the time being. I might revisit it later. Obviously, I could probably make decks from all the different commanders in Commander Legends for months and months and months, but I'm going to put it on hold for a little while. Kaldheim is already being spoiled, so I'll probably going to have to start making decks with that right away. Also, I wouldn't mind, start making decks with some of the older commanders that I have. So this is going to be my last one from Commander Legends. It's going to be Amareth. This is a commander that I thought would be a little more popular. This is the most popular of the Commander Legends decks that I have made, but it still isn't really that popular. I thought it would be more. It's Bant, it's putting lots of cards in your hands, it's a big dragon. Again, this is sort of like with hands where I think that people aren't sure exactly what direction to take it. For me, this is just a value commander, and I love value. As I've said, value wins games. This is just, I'm just going to keep getting cards off the top of my deck and playing stuff and just value and value and value, and I'll just win through that. So there's two things that I want to be doing with Amareth. I made some changes to this deck as I went because I realized you want to have a minimal amount of non-permanence in your deck, right? Because if you get like a Cyclonic Rift on top of your deck, then Amareth's ability is sort of going to freeze. You really can't get that Cyclonic Rift off the top of your deck. I mean, there are ways to do it, but essentially once you get like an instant or a sorcery on top of your deck, you sort of get stuck, right? So we want to minimalize that, right? So that we can just keep that engine going, right? The other thing we want to do is obviously we want to manipulate the top of our deck. So the usual suspects, I think I mentioned all these when I did my hands deck. Scroll Rack, Sensei's Divining Top, right? Are great for top deck manipulation. If you do get that Cyclonic Rift on top of your deck, you can quickly, with Top's probably the best of the bunch when it comes to this, because you can just keep switching out stuff, right? So you get a Rift on top of your deck, you pay one, swap it out, put a creature on top of your deck or a land or whatever. Scroll Rack is also good, just, you can only do it once per turn, right? So Top is always going to be better in this situation. And then I also have Miri's Guile and Sylvan Library, which are going to be, setting up the top of my deck on my upkeep. Again, you have to think about, you really got to put some thought into, okay, it's my upkeep, I'm going to draw a card. So, you put the card on top of your deck that you want to draw, and then you have to set it up so that, okay, I'm going to play a land first. So I'll put a land on top of my deck so I can put that in my hand. And then the next card below that is a creature because I'm going to play a creature next, right? And that's sort of the setup that you want. I'll just say right now, this can get a bit time consuming. Once you finally get Amareth in play, he's a 6-drop. It's going to take a little while. There's going to be some setup. Then you're going to play him, and then the engine's going to start rolling. And once he's in play, your turns are going to be, they can be a bit lengthy, right? And that kind of thing really attracts attention. So just make sure you're ready. When Amareth comes down, just make sure you're ready, because you're going to be attracting attention because you're going to be doing lots of stuff, right? I had a Tishar deck like this where it was just a very minimalist. I have lots of 3 CMC creatures and lots of historic cards. There was nothing busted that I was doing. There was no combos. It was just a value deck. And I would always get ganged up on because I was doing lots of stuff, right? That's it. I was just doing stuff. And, most people can't differentiate between the stuff you're doing is going to end the game and the stuff you're doing is just fun value stuff. So just be careful with that. You're going to be doing, you're going to be drawing lots of cards, you're going to be playing lots of stuff, and it's going to look like you're going off, as it were. And really you're not, but it is going to attract attention. So that being said, this is mostly going to be a value creature. I mean, it's heavily a creature deck. It's what I call a toolbox creature deck, where we're sort of getting creatures out of our deck to solve problems. So for that reason, Birthing Pod is just great in a deck like this. Just swap out one creature for another. And then obviously Prime Speaker Vanifar is also great in a deck like this, where I'm essentially just a Birthing Pod, right? Also, Wargate, a card that I never see. I mean, I guess it is Bant, so you're only going to see it in a Bant deck, but man, this is good. You can just go get a land with this, right? You can pay 3 mana, white, blue, green, and just go get any land you want out of your deck with this, right? because it's a 0 CMC. And also, more importantly, we can pay 4 and go get a Sensei's Divining Top or Mary's Guile or whatever. And then also we can go get a creature with it. I mean, it's just so versatile. It's great. I mean, you're getting any permanent, and in a deck that is, 99% permanence, that's going to be great. I also have Into the Wilds in this deck, just as a one-off, just because I think that, again, the value is so good there. If we're going to be looking at the top of our library all the time, just being able to go, okay, like for example, if you have Mary's Guile and this in play, you just stack the triggers so that you look at your Mary's Guile first, put a land on top, then Into the Wilds resolves, and you put that land directly into play. It just really, and it's not even tapped, right? This is actually a really underrated card. That land is untapped. It just goes directly into play. So it's a great way to get 2 land drops a turn. We also have Cream of the Crop, another way to set up the top of our deck, right? Cream of the Crop, we can put a creature in play, then the Amareth trigger is going to, go on the stack, and the Cream of the Crop, they both go on the stack on the same time. So you're going to stack them so that Amareth is last to resolve. So Cream of the Crop, you look, you put a creature on top of your library, then Amareth resolves and you put that creature in your hand, right? It's just another way to speed that stuff up. Aid from the Cowl, another card that is going to be taking advantage of us looking at the top of our deck. Having, in particular, Sensei's Divining Top, for anyone who doesn't know, this Sensei's Divining Top and Aid from the Cowl sort of combo with each other, where you can just essentially use it to draw a card, because you can flip your top, right? You tap it, draw a card, then put Sensei's Divining Top on top of your library, and that triggers the revolt because something left the battlefield. So what you're doing is you're drawing a card with top, and then at the end of your turn, top goes right directly back into play from off of the Aid from the Cowl trigger. So even just that is good value. But because we are going to be looking at the top of our library a lot, we can definitely manipulate that and get tons of value off of it. Hibernation's End, a little known card that I think people probably should play more in a creature deck. If you have a creature heavy deck, any kind of deck where Birthing Pod fits really well, this card also fits really well, because it's going to climb up the CMC ladder just like Birthing Pod does, right? It's a little more mana intensive, but other than that, it's going to just sit there and get you. I mean, think about it. You're paying 1 mana to put a 1 mana creature, a Birds of Paradise, directly into play. I mean, that seems worth it to me, right? And then we're going to pay 2 mana and we're going to put a Coiling Oracle directly into play. I mean, it's just a great value card, great in a deck like this. And also, it's getting us those triggers, right? It's getting us those Amareth triggers because it's putting a permanent, a creature directly into play. And then Awakening Zone, another card that doesn't get played nearly enough. Awakening Zone is just great for ramp, because in this deck, obviously, we have a commander that costs 6, so ramp is going to be relevant. But in particular, we're putting a creature into play, right? This is a creature token coming into play. That is going to give us an Amareth trigger. So if we have a creature on top of our deck, again, we manipulate it with a top or whatever. We put a creature on top of our deck at the beginning of our upkeep, and then that Eldrazi spawn token will trigger Amareth and put that creature directly into our hand. I mean, there's so many things that are going to be putting stuff into our hand. We're going to be just drawing cards like crazy. Smothering Tithe obviously is another card that does the same thing, but with artifacts. I mean, it's just a great card, so it's going to go in the deck anyway. But just as a note, it will take those artifacts off the top of your deck and put them in your hand too. I'm not going to mention all the creatures in the deck. There's so many. I'm just going to mention the ones that I think are significant and are going to aid our strategy. So Cryptic Annelid, I have a couple of scry creatures like this. Cryptic Annelid's a funny one because everything from Future Sight is kind of a funny card. Cryptic Annelid comes into play and you just scry like crazy, right? You scry 1, scry 2, scry 3. So you just make sure you just set the top of your deck up nicely, so that you can kind of go off that turn and put a bunch of cards in your hand. I also have Fairy Seer just because we want 1-drops, right? Because of Birthing Pod, because of Hibernation's End, we want to have that nice spread of CMC creatures. And then this one also scries, so why not, right? I have Afara, God of the Polis, just because we are going to be having a lot of creatures come into play, right? Even the Awakening Zone, putting an Eldrazi spawn creature into play is going to be enough to give us a card draw off of Afara. I got Sweet Gum Recluse. I really like this card. Again, we are going to be looking at the top of our library a lot. So it's just advantageous for us. You know, you can put more Cascade in here if you want, because Cascade, I don't love Cascade because of the randomness. I don't want to cast Sweet Gum Recluse and then flip a Cyclonic Rift off the top, and then I only get to bounce one thing and I've wasted my Cyclonic Rift. I don't love that. But if we can manipulate the top of our library, then it becomes really, really good, because we can just make sure we're getting a 4 or a 5 CMC creature that's going to come off the top. Mystic Snake, I'll just mention, I love Mystic Snake. It's one of my favorite cards of all time. But in particular, it's in this deck because it is a permanent, right? Again, we would rather have a counterspell that is a permanent, that is a creature, rather than actual counterspell, right? Because minimizing the amount of instants and sorceries in the deck is ideal. So for that reason, we have lots of, again, like Knight of Autumn, for example. Rather than a Krosan Grip, we're going to have Knight of Autumn because it's a permanent. So we want to minimize the amount of instants and sorcery spells in the deck. So just as a note, I have Elseed of Life's Bounty, okay? Now, why do I have this card? I have this card because it is an enchantment and a creature. Okay, it also is a good card. I can use it to save my Amareth, because people are definitely going to be targeting your Amareth, so keep that in mind. It can save our Amareth, but also it is an enchantment and a creature, right? You can go more down this road as well, because when this card comes into play, it's going to trigger Amareth, and Amareth is going to look for an enchantment or a creature on top of your library and put it in your hand, right? So if you have more card types, an artifact creature, stuff like that, you can go that route, where the more card types you have, the more it's going to look for that card type on top of your library, right? So just keep that in mind. I also have Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter, just again another great value card that cares about the top card of our library, and since we can manipulate the top card of our library, it just works great in this deck. I also have Hunting Grounds. Here's a card that I've been wanting to use forever. I finally found a deck that I can use it in. Now, why is it in this deck? This is, by the way, another underrated, super powerful card that could go in a lot of decks. Why is it in this deck? Well, what's going to happen? Okay, I've play tested the deck a few times, and what's going to happen is you're just going to start filling your hand. Okay, you're going to fill your hand so fast that you're not going to be able to cast things, and you're just going to have a full hand, and you're not going to have enough mana. It's also not a horrible idea to put something like a Walking Atlas in this deck that will, get those lands out of your hands, or possibly an Exploration that you can just play lands faster, because you are just going to be filling your hand and filling your hand and filling your hand. And Hunting Grounds later in the game is so good, because now every time an opponent casts a spell, any of those creatures in our hands, we can just put them directly into play. I mean, you're just going to start emptying your hand of all those creatures, and then you get the trigger. Right? This is like the win con game ending play here, right? Amareth's in play, Hunting Grounds is in play. Our opponent casts a spell. We put a Woodfall Primus directly onto the battlefield. That's pretty awesome. And then also get an Amareth trigger. We manipulate the top of our library, put a Tidespout Tyrant on top of our deck. That Tidespout Tyrant goes directly into our hand. Then the next time an opponent casts a spell, that Tidespout Tyrant goes directly into play, and rinse and repeat, right? So it's just such good value. This is the sort of a setup, right? You want this deck you want to take it slow with this deck. For that reason, make sure you have a lot of removal. I say it all the time, removal wins games. So just make sure you got some board wipes and you got some stuff to slow people down, because it is going to take you a while to get going. But once you get going, you're going to outvalue your opponent. There's nothing they can do. You're going to have so much value because your hand's always going to be full. And as everyone should know in EDH, on turn 8 or 9 or 10, if your hand is full, man, it's really hard to beat that, because everyone else is probably not going to be in that situation. And someone can board wipe, fine. I'll just start over again. You're going to have so many lands in play, you're going to have so many cards in your hand that a board wipe isn't even going to slow you down that much. Speaking of board wipes, I'll just say Hallowed Burial, super, super, super underrated card. Doesn't get played nearly enough. It solves so many problems. This might be the best board wipe in the entire format. Austere Command is close. It's Austere Command or this. If you're talking about just creatures, this might be the best, because putting creatures on the bottom of people's libraries it just really screws people. It gets around indestructible. It gets around dice triggers. It can really screw people. when you hollow burial. And in this deck, remember this deck, it's a birthing pod deck, right? It's a hibernation's end deck. It's a we're going to search creatures out of our library and put them into play. So hollow burial is perfect in this deck because we don't mind our creatures going back into our library, right? And then just one more note for the lands, a Bant Panorama or something like that, like stuff that is going to get you landfall triggers is always going to be good. Croson Verge is another great one. Dryad Arbor. This is a deck, I don't know how much Dryad Arbor costs, or I haven't really touched on the whole budget cost issues with my deck building. I just build decks that I think are fun and interesting, and I try to stay away from super expensive cards. Dryad Arbor, I don't know how much it costs. I know it's kind of an expensive card, but it is a good card for this deck, again, because it has the land and creature types. So you can put it directly in play and then get a land or creature off the top of your deck. So it is a good inclusion in this deck if you can get your hands on one. And that's pretty much it. That is my Amareth deck. It is lots of fun. It is essentially, I actually didn't have a Bant deck until this, and Bant is probably my favorite 3-color combination because all of the Bant commanders tend to be just either silly or overpowered or too popular or there are a couple that are just really bad. And this one, I'm really glad this card wasn't as popular as I thought it would be because I really did want to make a deck. I wanted to make a Bant deck and I wanted to make a birthing pod, creature, toolbox creature deck, and I wanted to make a deck where I was manipulating the top of my library. So this all culminates into all of that, which I really like. It's a really fun deck, and I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I do. Thanks for tuning in.